right, good afternoon. Can you hear me all right? Okay, it is 4:15 and we're going to get this rolling. No Spirit Airlines flight delays here, okay? Welcome to the 34th Annual Peace Studies Conference. Our list of sponsors is quite long, and I think it shows kind of the range of interests in this topic, which is a good thing because it's multifaceted and needs to be worked at from a lot of different directions. Sponsored by the Peace Studies Department, the Environmental Studies Department, the Global Health Grant, AfroSTEM, Archipelago Caribbean Association, the Climate Justice Club, the Global Health Affairs Club, the Pre-Med Club, and, oh my God, Spirit Airlines. No. That would have been awkward. Welcome specifically to our Cultivating Hope and Change student research in support of global climate action. I'm your moderator for today, Jeff Anderson. I'm chair of Peace Studies and also kind of organized this portion of the Peace Studies Conference. And let me talk a little bit about workload. Panelists have the highest level of workload. They had to prepare to share their research undertaking. They're going to share their experiences at COP, and they're going to share how their experiences shape them. Some have been there last year. Some have been there last year and are going again this year. And some are new to the COP experience. The audience tasks. Your job's to take it all in, to summon your curiosity and your courage to pose questions at the end, so you make good use of their experiences, and hopefully some of you might be considering doing this yourself. For me, my job's mostly to get out of the way, although maybe to cast that evil eye that I've been practicing all week for if they're going beyond their 6 to 7 minutes each, okay? But before I get out of the way, I want to tell you about the day I got married, okay? It was Black Friday. I don't just call it Black Friday because it was the day I got married. It was the day after Thanksgiving. It wasn't a beautiful day. I mean, it was a beautiful wedding, all was good, but the weather was classic Minnesotan late November. The officiant was Father Rene McGraw. That's not the reason why this conference is dedicated to him, but he's done lots of things that he deserves dedication. One of the things he maybe should have done is not letting us write our own vows, which he did. And he didn't put any length on them, and we tended to make them longer than they had to be. All he said is that they just had to include the kind of the mandatory stuff, but even he was kind of wink on that, okay? Mandatory things you might wonder, but be like fidelity and faithfulness and those kind of things. So we wrote beautiful vows. They were way too long. He would whisper them into the mic, and the audience could kind of hear them before we read them back, so you could tell from their reaction that they were into it in a big way. People were literally moved to tears in the audience. And then on the clause that, as Renee was whispering, about fidelity and faithfulness. And my wife, as she read that back, inserted the word try in front. Okay? Completely accidentally, a Freudian slip. And the whole audience in that church went from tearfulness to like watching the movie Airplane and falling into the aisle laughing because they knew that was so wrong. Because they knew that wasn't enough just to try. And you're wondering, how does this connect? And you're going to find out in a moment. Like marriage, international environmental governance, take some trying, take some effort day after day. It isn't always easy. Perhaps that's why in international governance, they actually start their agreements often with what we call tri-conventions, where they get people to agree to things simply because they're not signing on to it. They're just agreeing that this is a big problem, we need to do some research, and we're going to meet here on a regular basis, and we're going to build our way towards commitments. Okay, some of you might be familiar with the ozone hole. When that burst on the scene in the early to mid 80s, we had the tri-convention, was known as the Vienna Convention of 1985. Okay? That accelerated quickly to what's known as the Montreal Protocol in 1986. We went from trying to total commitment in 1 year. And then each of those conference of parties, that's what COP stands for, would essentially add commitments to that with the ozone hole. And the ozone hole has undergone quite a bit of repair over time as a result of these commitments that have happened. I started teaching here in 1992, which incidentally was the year that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, isn't that what you hipsters call it? Right? That's when that all was adopted. And then it came into force in 1984. And so we had, if you're wondering about the math and things, how it works, it started and adopted in 92, came into force in 94, first COP in 1995. So since 2005, we've had a pretty continuous CSB SJU presence there, and that's what's represented here today for COP 27 and COP 28. So please join me in welcoming this group of students, and if you're young enough and here long enough, please imagine being on a panel like this and doing some of what they've done. So thank you. And I will let them introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? My name's Mahina. I'm a senior environmental studies major and studio art minor. I'm from Makakilo, Hawaii, and I use she, her pronouns. Should we go?
No, you go ahead.
So I'm just going to share a little bit about my experience going to COP and kind of what the process was like for my research, and then a little bit about my findings. So for my research, I was looking at the sociocultural impacts of climate change and colonization in Pacific Island communities. As a Native Hawaiian myself and being from a Pacific Island community, this is something that was really dear to my heart. And I was really interested in seeing how this functioned on more of an international level and getting to talk to different people from different Pacific Island communities. So at COP, in sort of the, I forget which zone it is, but it's the zone that's open to people that aren't government officials. And so in those areas, you can visit different pavilions, they call them, and usually different countries have pavilions or different organizations. And so the pavilion that I hung out at a lot was called the Moana Blue Pacific Pavilion. And in Hawaiian, Moana means ocean, and this also means the same thing in a lot of different other Pacific Island cultures. So I just got to hang out there and talk to a variety of different people from a variety of different Pacific Island nations, like Tuvalu, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, and I just asked them questions about the sociocultural impacts of climate change and colonization in their specific contexts. So just for a little background, the Pacific Island nations and communities today are among those most disproportionately affected by climate change, in the sense that sea level rise, resource availability, and a bunch of different structural things are hitting these communities a lot harder than, say, the US or even us here in Minnesota. And so this is something that has been talked about, but in a lot of the scholarly things that I read and a lot of the preliminary research that I was doing, something that I noticed that was missing were the voices of the people that are from those places. And so I really wanted to kind of highlight and dig deep into that and, yeah, highlight the unheard voices and untold stories. So some of the main findings that came out from my research were the role of women in the climate crisis and climate solutions, the role of traditional knowledge and identity, and also the role of youth and the future in the context of storytelling. So for women, this is particularly a burden on them because women are traditionally providers of their households in Pacific Island communities. So in a lot of ways, with sea level rise, drought, saltwater intrusion, and all of these different things that I mentioned earlier, women are kind of having to shoulder those burdens and be the ones that have to go out further to fish to find food, or will have to travel farther inland to find water for their families. And so that was one big thing that even in my interviews, I conducted a bunch of different interviews, even the male identifying interviewees stressed the importance of the role of women in their communities and how without the women, without the mothers, without their sisters, their aunts, and their teachers, like, they would have no community. So that was something that I thought was just really powerful and super interesting. And then kind of moving into traditional knowledge and identity, a handful of different interviewees talked about how the modern education system and with westernization has impacted the way that the youth sees their traditional culture and uses that knowledge in their day-to-day lives. And essentially their takeaways were that modern education does not necessarily align with their traditional ways of learning and ways of knowing, and because of that, it's caused a rift in their traditions and their cultures. And so along with that, a lot of the interviewees discussed how they see the number one biggest tool and solution for the climate crisis is turning back to traditional and indigenous knowledge. And that is very much a place-by-place basis and specific and unique to the knowledge and places where those people are from. But they think that if we kind of integrate that more into climate solutions and climate conversations, then that's how the most productive and lasting change will be made. And then finally, just youth in the future. I interviewed a lot of youth from different Pacific Island communities, and it was interesting to see how the older generations were really concerned about passing on knowledge to the youth, and the youth were really concerned about educating others outside of their own culture. Yeah, so that was kind of the gist of my research and my COP experience. Thank you.
Hey y'all. Oh, yeah. Hey y'all, my name is Tom Hobday. I use he, him pronouns. I am an environmental studies and peace studies double major with an English minor, and I am from St. Paul, Minnesota. And I also went to the COP last year, and my topic was coalition building among youth in the global south. And I had a more unique experience at the COP because I was working alongside Julia Fine, who was doing postdoctorate research on how, I wrote it on my hand, role of emotions in motivating youth activists at the Conference of the Parties. And Julia was awesome. I really enjoyed working with her. The only problem was that she was petrified of approaching people for interviews. So I sort of took on that role, and so we would tag team. We hung out by the youth pavilion, and I got really good at my spiel of like, hey, my name is Tom Hobday, this is Julia Fine, we're researchers from the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, and we'd love if we could talk to you a little bit about your experience at the COP, and then like talk about our respective research questions a little bit. And so over the course of the week, I interviewed, I think, 22 individuals, and that was just extremely eye-opening. One thing that I really recognize about this process is it's one thing to do the preliminary research and the background information and all that, and it's another thing to hear these stories in person and see how it's lived out and their experiences in real time. And yeah, so one of the three main takeaways that I had was, number one, the role of social media is incredibly important in creating these coalitions, whether that be communicating the information to a bunch of individuals who might not have access to that beforehand, whether that be through Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. That's a way in which youth activists are really making their voices heard in a way that wasn't accessible to prior generations. The second way was through having these spaces like the COP, like not Model UN, but like similar places where in-person connections can be made. It's one thing to have those relationships on social media. It's another thing to physically interact with that person. And so I learned about how important that was. And then finally, I learned about the importance of having a common goal to sort of unite under. An example of this is a man from South Africa was talking to me about how he was, organizing for Fridays for Future, and the entire lead up to it was about divestment. It was divestment, like the entire time. And then when the day came for the walkout and the protest and like the actual action piece of it, the people who were representing Fridays for Future that had come to visit South Africa came with like an entirely different agenda. And just that sort of miscommunication like led to not a flop, but a less powerful mobilization than could have been. So I found that having that really clear vision of what you want to work towards was an important component in youth activism. Much like Mahina, a lot of the preliminary research I did focused on youth activists in the global north, whether that be Greta Thunberg, whether that be whoever else. A lot of the more prominent and listened to voices are from those areas that are not as impacted by climate change as the global south. And so I wanted to focus on that area of the world and where these issues are much more prevalent and real, and yeah. So yeah, that was my little explanation, and thanks for listening.
Is that good? Okay. I'm Jalayna Smith-Moore. I'm also a senior. I'm an environmental studies major with a biology minor, and I use she, her pronouns. For COP, it was kind of similar to Mahina's. I looked into how women are impacted by drought in Africa, and then how they're leaders for kind of climate adaptation in that realm. I initially went into it because I thought it'd be a good combo. I couldn't take gender in the environment or sustainable ag within like the environmental studies department, so I thought it would be a good crossover. And before going, a lot of the research that I saw spoke about how women are the most impacted by drought, especially because in Africa, and I looked mostly in like the eastern region, when they're impacted by drought, like women are the ones who have to go and fetch the water for their families, and as drought gets worse, they have to go farther, so it'll be like full days that they have to go, and girls are also included in that, and so a lot of girls would lose out on education and things like that, but then also in general, there's a lot of safety issues when women have to travel that far to fetch water, which was a really big concern as well. And then another kind of social thing is that because there's drought and if people are depending on farming for like sustenance, the men often would be the ones who would go into the cities to like find another way of gaining some sort of income. And then that left a lot of, there's like the physical aspect of like the burden of having to find water, but then they're also the only caregivers within their family units when the men go off to get more money. And so there was also like mental aspects, and then feeling like failures, which is a big thing with climate change, that women kind of have that like mental impact of feeling like they can't provide for their family or they can't protect their family, or these really like kind of traditional kind of ideas of what a mother should be able to do for their children and how can you do that in the face of the climate crisis. And while I was there, it was interesting, and now that I'm saying it, I hope I'm right, it was the first COP in Africa, right? No, yeah, so it was the first African COP, which was interesting, and there was a lot of energy surrounding that. I was lucky enough, one of the like women's sort of panel before the actual events for the day started was specifically about African women, and I got to meet a lot of cool people who were doing work in like climate, specifically African women, and it was just a lot of hope that was at the conference because it was being held in Africa. And because of that, I got to meet some women for my interviews. They all ended up being from Kenya, which I didn't plan on, but then when I got back, that's what I focused on more so. And they had really different backgrounds. So one woman did like government for like the Farmers Association. One woman did like more climate science in that kind of realm, and another one was doing grassroots work. She had her own organization that worked with indigenous women and leading climate adaptation for agriculture. And they all had this overarching idea of so similar things like indigenous knowledge is really important, and then also that women need to be at the forefront since they're most impacted. And then also an important thing, which is I think a pretty universal thing to be considered, is that when you're making climate adaptations, especially if it's like global north countries that are kind of just shipping this technology out to global south countries, it's really, really important that there's some kind of collaboration, because something that was echoed in both my research and also the women I interviewed is that even if they sent technology and they acted like it was going to be revolutionary or like it was going to be great, when those women or communities actually got the technology, they either rejected it or it just didn't actually work in the context that they needed it. So that was a really important thing that I found. And then just like indigenous knowledge of knowing where to plant or seed saving or things of that nature was really important as well. And they all echoed that even though it was hard for them as women to get to the positions that they were in, that it's really important that if anything's going to be accomplished in that realm, that women need to be heard within it. So yeah, that was my project for last year. And then along with Fredi, I'm going again this year to Dubai. And my project is going to be focusing on kind of also, I found it's going to probably have something to do with kind of climate adaptation, but I'm looking at coastal communities and how ocean acidification is impacting reefs in global south communities and how like it impacts indigenous communities and how that relates to trying to find the best way to both restore the reefs and protect communities who are being negatively impacted by the fact that they don't have that protection anymore. So.
Hey everyone, my name is Fredi. I am a senior political science major and history minor. I'm from Minneapolis and my pronouns are he, him. Last year, my research was focused on climate migration and how it related to conflict in different regions of the world, and focusing on what conflict meant for my research was political instability, lack of resources in regards to food, water, agriculture, livestock, things like that, and how all of that contributed on top of the climate crisis in different regions, forcing people to migrate and making situations worse for people that are on front lines of the climate crisis. I went in kind of having an idea of like who I wanted to interview and who I wanted to talk to and what I wanted to do, but as for those of us that went, it's kind of weird because you don't know exactly what's going to happen every day at the COP, and things change like minute to minute, so you have to be able to adapt really easily to different changes at the COP. So when I was there, I spent a lot of my time at the Global Center for Climate Mobility Pavilion, and a lot of it, since it was the first time it was in Africa, a lot of the focus was on African countries and their participation and involvement within the discussions at the COP. So I was able to interview 3 people from Africa, 2 from Nigeria and 1 from Uganda, and got to learn more about what climate migration meant in those specific countries in Africa. And a lot of my research that I had done prior to the COP really focused on Central and South America, Asia, the Pacific Islands, and those type of areas that are more talked about when we talk about climate migration. But when I talked to them, I asked a variety of questions, one of them being who is not being represented at the COP that specific year. A lot of them said youth are not being represented at the COP, people with disabilities are not, a lot of women aren't, especially women of color, queer people are not, and there was a lot of concern of what this COP meant and how we were gonna do something about it. I went in kind of like having a lot of hope and for climate migration, like having solutions for them, and there being a pavilion for it was really impactful to see that there was discussion happening at the COP relating to my topic. But after, I think a lot of us were talking about how it seemed kind of weird that solutions that were happening were not really being addressed that well, because it is so complicated to have almost 200 countries agree to the same thing with addressing the climate crisis. But in all of that, what I found a lot of hope in was the people that I talked to there, because they are on the front lines right now, and they're fighting every day to make change happen in their communities and worldwide. And that's what I focused on when I came back. A lot of us participated in panels or presenting in our local communities, writing articles for local newspapers and things like that, and just sharing what was told to us at the COP. And this year, like Jalayna said, we are going back to COP 28 in Dubai, and I will be focusing this time on indigenous communities and how spirituality plays an impact in their level of activism. So just looking at how spirituality can influence you, or how it influences indigenous people specifically, and how they care for not just like the land they're on, but how they're being affected by climate change, and how their response can be different from other people that don't have that same shared experience of being indigenous and being kind of set to the side. Yeah.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Sorry, can you hear me? So my name is Dolezal. I'm a sophomore Johnny, economics and math double major. So a little bit different from everyone else here. This will be my first year going to COP, so I don't have any experience at COP. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about what the research experience has been like so far and some key takeaways there. I came into this class not having any research background. I've never really done my own research paper. And I had like 3 different topics in mind of things I was really passionate about doing. And what this class has really taught me and has been really like rewarding so far is just learning from like the really fantastic role models around you and being able to have that trial and error of like reading multiple different research documents and being able to kind of narrow down what's in your field of interest and how that is going to apply to your research in COP. As far as the Conference of Parties goes, my topic is sustainable leapfrog development in sub-Saharan Africa. And something I've learned as I've gone through this is really the role that technological advancement, and specifically leapfrog development, can have on equipping different marginalized populations with key capabilities to like the Human Development Index. So one specific instance that I'm looking at is the widespread use of mobile banking in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically in Rwanda, and how the widespread use of like telephones in Africa has been able to equip people who would not have access to traditional banking systems as like traditionally we would have in the United States, with access to like fiscal freedom. So it's rural populations and women's being able to gain access to that fiscal freedom that allows them to enter from like the informal workforce into more of a formal workforce, and how that applies to equity and development in Africa broadly. As far as what I'm excited for, I think that there's a lot of excitement in our class, and there's a lot of people really finding different ways to be able to like get excited about presenting their research and everything. I know I'm one of the couple people in our COP class who will be going to the Society for Applied Anthropology in Santa Fe, New Mexico later this March to present my research. And I think it's just a really fantastic and unique opportunity, especially as a sophomore and an underclassman, to learn from a lot of really, really intelligent people and kind of set those people as role models going forward into my junior and senior year. Yeah, I think that's all I got.
Yeah, so my name is Landon Peterson. I am a senior political science major, peace studies and English minor from Minneapolis, Minnesota. My COP story, I went with many of those that are over here, but my story starts the summer before I even got on campus to go to COP, so the summer before my, would have been my junior year, yeah. I spent the summer at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and I was in the Community Development and Engagement Division, and part of our work is kind of taking a look at what's happening in the 9th District and what we need to kind of address. And so one day my boss and me kind of sat down and we talked about how is climate change going to affect the work that we do here. And I would recommend that exercise for nearly everybody in this room. I think it's important and it's valuable to start thinking about those things, and probably important for the Fed to also start answering some of those questions. And what we came up with, because obviously climate change impacts a significant chunk of our lives in every way, is that homeowners insurance is a big part of that picture for us. We do a lot of housing stuff over there. And that's what really led into the fall in my project at COP. And so what I wanted to end up looking at is how has climate change impacted homeowners insurance rates, and how is that impacting people? I certainly think there's a lot to go off of there. I know we've seen in Florida and California in recent years, insurers pulling out of the state completely, people kind of feeling like they're being abandoned, and rightfully so. Even in Minnesota, we've seen rates increase, particularly because of a number of billion-dollar disasters that have happened around the globe and in the United States, but also with hailstorm in Minnesota last spring and things like that. So that was the goal for my project, was to take a look at some of these things and how they're impacting each other. And I think that's one thing that I found immediately, is that this idea of cost and coverage go hand in hand with each other. So there's a lack of coverage, particularly in the global south, but then there's also rising rates. And as I said before, those things go hand in hand, because when you're talking about rising premiums are really forcing consumers to either pay more or to opt out of insurance, and it's also prohibiting potential customers or purchasers from being able to buy. I'm going to talk about the results portion of my research first, and then I'll kind of get into my COP experience, because they're two different things. But on a coverage standpoint, there's a super cool event at COP that had a number of different panelists from different organizations and companies. And David Howden, who's a CEO at an insurance group, was talking about how only 7% of the global south is insured. That was his number, and I was able to find some kind of corroborating statistics, but I don't think there's like a solid number, but that was the number that he had come up with. And he really attributed that to 3 different reasons. So reason number 1 was understanding the value. That his argument was essentially that people in the global south, and companies hold culpability in this too, of not getting there and explaining people the value, but that there's kind of a transactional loss there to a certain extent between the value that insurance can provide and the people understanding and willing and being able to purchase into that. Number 2, he said, was affordability. So going off of reason number 1, people have to be able to afford insurance and think it's a good thing for them and a valuable thing for them. And then number 3, he said, is trust. And I think I'll talk about this a lot more later, but trust is a big part of insurance and even of the functioning of COP in general. It was interesting to get to COP and to really see how insurance companies are perceived and how they're treated, and not that that's good or bad, because a lot of those emotions are rightfully so, but that's a unique part that I'll touch on later as well. To move to cost, there's kind of 2 reasons for cost increases. So obviously climate change and then inflation. I just want to pull a quick statistic. So in the United States, 90% of homeowners have seen a cost increase since May 2021, and that average cost increase per year is $134. That's not a massive amount of money by any means, but for people who are already kind of living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, that can be a serious cost burden on them financially. Lastly, to talk about some of the results portion of my paper, I really focused on consumer impact. So as you can guess, low and moderate income families are more likely to live in climate-prone areas. I think we see this time and time again, and we see climate migration forcing people into more of these areas. And it's also forcing people to either not pay or to really move, and that's a big part of this as well. I also, in this paper, wanted to not only focus on what's happening, but what can be done. And so I looked at kind of highlighting 5 pieces of innovation for insurance companies. There's a lot of different things that I focused on. I can talk about some of them if people want later, but there's different elements to this. And one that was interesting to me at COP was this idea of creating the Global Risk Modeling Alliance, which is a public-private partnership that works on data sharing so companies are kind of better able to understand where the risk is and where the risk isn't. These certainly aren't perfect alliances. A lot of these things are kind of thrown together, but I think it's a start at creating an atmosphere where there's more transparency in this process. And then some of the other things we talked about were kind of reinsurance pools, making sure people get better information access, other things like that. As far as my COP experience went, as I kind of alluded to earlier, it was really exciting to see at this past COP kind of the move towards the emergence of a loss and damage fund. I think that really took center stage during COP, and that was really cool to see. But in some ways it took kind of the sight or the spotlight away from this ability to use insurance companies. And I completely understand that. I think insurance companies, as some people had said at COP, is kind of proven to have let the people down in many regards. And I think we've seen that in places like California and Florida and other locations like that, particularly even in the global south where coverage isn't even provided. But I also think there's an element to this where insurance companies can and need to be valuable in this aspect of fighting against climate change. And I'll kind of end with a quote by a guy named Robin Levy, who is the CEO of the Jamaica Cooperative Credit Union, who essentially said, lenders or banks are looking for mitigation on investments, they're looking for protection in lending, and insurance companies provide that protection. And that, I think, is the kind of ultimate thing that I want to leave all of you with, is that the past is certainly the past, and I know insurance companies aren't always the most popular people in the room, but I also think they do have a place in this discussion, and they deserve a piece of this, just as all of us deserve to kind of continue pursuing this and looking for these innovation solutions and hold them accountable as well. So that's what I found, and I thank you for the time.
I could use my moderator prerogative with the panel for just a second here. If maybe each of you, in no particular order, could just kind of share, because we advertise as such that you might, just how this might shape your future plans, just anything you might carry forward from this into your future work. Some of you, if you're just a student now, you got years to do student type stuff with it. And those of you that are close to graduating or choosing jobs, or just any thoughts that you have. And
I was able to have some conversations with some youth activists surrounding food justice, and that's a realm that I see myself going into within at least the next few years. We'll see how long that path winds for me, and being able to get that perspective on a more global scale as opposed to more locally within my own community was something that was really impactful and something that I'll take from this COP to sort of guide me forward.
I can go in the interim. There's kind of a short-term impact to my work and then a long-term impact. And so the short-term is that last year I applied for the Truman Scholarship. I was unsuccessful. But what I kind of oriented my research part of that application on was some of the work that I had done here. And then I specifically moved into more of the resilience side of things and was able to have some really, really cool conversations with people in Minnesota, someone at the Commerce Department about some different programs that they're offering and different things like that. And so doing this research allowed me to have those conversations and walk into it kind of knowing more than I would have originally. The long-term part of this is that research like this really just involves taking really complex things and breaking them down and then putting them on paper and being able to talk about them in your own words. I mentioned the Fed earlier. This January I'll be back there after graduation, and not doing work around climate change, but around some more of these complex things as we're kind of talking about how people are able to work within the economy, specifically in the United States. And so this work will certainly come in handy when I approach that work as well.
For me, this is more of a immediate current thing, but the kind of preliminary research that I did for this project has influenced what I'm doing for my senior thesis right now. And so that I'm looking at the role of art within climate change narratives and climate change conversations. And so the storytelling piece of this project was a really big thing for me. And so I'll be interviewing different Native Hawaiian artists who have kind of been working with climate change and the impacts of climate change in Hawaii. So very much connected and building off of this research.
So my kind of I don't know what I want to do, full-heartedly what I want to do, but it is public policy more generally as what I focused on while being a political science major, and also just taking this course twice, just policy in general. With last year I did focus on my two policy focuses that I research a lot, which are immigration and climate change, and combined them together to be one research project. And then this time it's something similar with climate change and indigenous populations. But later on, once I graduate, I definitely want to continue working with immigration and climate change, either separately or somehow find a way to connect them in some way, either in the nonprofit sector or in government itself, either locally or federally, and just keep working towards advocating for those type of policies to be enacted, especially migrants that are leaving their homelands because of climate change, because there's not a lot of policy there that is there to help these people that have to leave their own homes because of climate change. So yeah, that's pretty much what I really want to focus on. Those are my passions within public policy and political science.
Yeah, so this past summer, I really started to think a little bit more about graduate school. I read some really fantastic books on economic development that really inspired me, and I had really great professors freshman year that sort of kind of pushed me a tiny bit in that direction. So for me, COP28 in this class holistically has just been an experience to get firsthand experience with research. I wanted to learn if I would like research, if it's something I want to do in the future, as well as kind of build a base for when I get to my senior capstone and I'm able to build on what I've done here in COP, and if I do COP next year and maybe my senior year as well, to be able to continue my skills as a researcher and maybe come up with something my senior year or junior year that is a really fantastic product that will make me more competitive for graduate schools. As well as something else is, this is just a topic I'm really passionate about, and I've always wanted to travel a lot in college. It's kind of one of the reasons why I came to St. John's, was to take advantage of the unique opportunities to study abroad and see the world. And I think COP28 is such a fantastic opportunity to be able to meet people who have had really different life experiences than my own. And in the field of economic development, when you're looking at a lot of countries that are not developed like the United States, and the cultures are very different, I don't have experience with that, and I really am looking forward to being able to meet people who have completely different backgrounds to me, and to be able to connect with them and kind of find where that common ground as humans we are, and see how that can kind of take me into the future and shape my beliefs in my future as well. So
I would say, so my first one is a bit less formal, but I think that as how you were talking about Julia didn't want to ask people for interviews, that's definitely more my personality. I'm more introverted, so I'd say COP was really great for just getting me to be more outgoing. I think it's a great it's like exposure therapy almost, like being there. It's like so hectic and you just have to really go for it. So I think like for anyone that is like in the crowd and you're like an underclassman, like don't be afraid to go because it's a really awesome opportunity. And when you get there, like you'll surprise yourself, you will. And then also I think that it was a cool opportunity because while it was like a global kind of conference, it made me realize from the different panels that I went to and the different people I spoke to, just how important like local work can be, even if like people might say it's too small scale or things like that. So it made me want to kind of steer my career towards building resilience in like local communities or on the small scale. So.
Okay, let's open it up to audience questions at this point. Make me tell you about my second nerd. Dr. Holder.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cheryl Holder. I'm going to be the speaker later, and wonderful experiences, thank you. I'm sort of interested in, as an intern, as a primary care doctor, first and foremost, I'm interested in your experiences, having learned all this material, having gone over what you've learned. How has that changed, or what impact it had on your day-to-day relationships with your classmates and your family?
I think number one is just like opening up those avenues of conversation. I went right before Thanksgiving break last year, and then got to bring that experience to my extended family of 20 cousins, 14 aunts and uncles, like a really large space, in a space where, a lot of them would not be talking about how the climate crisis affects youth in Nigeria. Like that's like not something that would be a normal Thanksgiving topic. And so number one is just like exposure. And then number two, I think, like really being conscious of how I consume my media and where my sources are, and like being more cognizant of what voices are not being projected in the media that I'm consuming, and trying to find those ulterior spaces, or like being exposed to social media accounts of people that I interacted with and learning from them and what's going on in their lives on like a more day-to-day basis, for me personally, yeah.
On a personal level, COP was such a phenomenal experience. It was my first time out of the country, and going to Egypt for your first time out of the country is definitely not maybe necessarily something I'd recommend, but it was a heck of an experience, and I turned 21 while at Poland on a layover, and it was a great time. But I think the other thing that I'll say that's so cool about COP from a personal standpoint is that you're watching people like live through the most important 2 weeks of their year, essentially, and you're watching people who are at the top of whatever they're doing in whatever space they're doing. And that was what was most fun for me, is sitting on like a chair or on a couch in one of the main open areas and watching people walk past with the conversations they're having and what they're talking about and race around and things like that. It was certainly inspiring. It was really, really cool. I got to meet a ton of really cool people. And then kind of to what Tom said too, to be able to come back and I presented for my church's climate justice club. I had a 12-slide presentation to my family on a PowerPoint. Like, it's just things like that were able to be really fun, and it doesn't all have to be so policy heavy either. I think it was a lot of showing off the super cool experiences that we had and being able to swim in the Red Sea and different things like that. And so I certainly think it allowed me to dive into a new version of myself through that trip, and then also be able to kind of share that with other people, which was a lot of fun. So.
This is kind of going off of something that Finn said earlier about the opportunities that our school specifically provides for traveling and even just having very unique experiences. So going to COP was something that I kind of came to this school with the idea that like, oh, that's something that I eventually want to do. And now having done it, I feel fulfilled. And I'm really grateful that our school does have these really unique opportunities. And not only do they have the opportunities, but they find ways for students to make that a reality. And so just for me, kind of like coming from a place of gratitude, it's like this school is really awesome at doing that and finding all the really cool people to do all the really cool things. So, yeah.
I think my experience is going to be slightly different because I haven't been to COP yet. But one thing I really want to say is it just feels really empowering to have that opportunity to be like with people who are making real difference in the world and people who are really, really passionate about the same things that you are. And learning from just even everyone on this panel here today is like all absolutely role models to me. And having those role models as a sophomore of these like really fantastic people who are going to go out and do fantastic things in the world, really like it's empowering. It's empowering every single day. I promise you that. And if you're thinking about doing it, I really hope you do, because it seriously is like has already felt life-changing, and I haven't gotten to COP yet, so.
I would definitely echo everything that has been said already. Like Landon, this was the first time I was out of the country, and that was really amazing. And it was Egypt, so it wasn't like, it was like, you know, other side of the world, different continent, across the ocean, and a completely different setting, culture, language, everything. So that was a really cool experience to just be there for just a week and be able to interact with people that live there. But also everyone from around the world. This is the United Nations conference. Like everyone comes from around the world to attend this conference and learn and share people their knowledge with everyone else. And it was just amazing. And you know, as a political science major, I did go to President Biden's speech at the COP, so that was really fun to see. And just like all like the delegations from Congress walking by me, like as they were like going to like their seats and stuff, was crazy to see, because I would have never seen them otherwise. I had to go to Egypt to see my representatives in Congress. But yeah, that was this was just a unique experience that I'm glad that I'm doing again. And hopefully, like maybe in the future, my job will allow me to go to COP or something. But it's just amazing, and I really like it, just for the kind of community that comes together from around the world to work towards one common goal, which is to try and solve the climate crisis.
Yeah, also echoing, I don't want to be too repetitive, but it was really awesome, like other people have said, to be able to come home and tell people about it. I think my mom's been to Mexico, but like neither of my parents have like flown over the ocean before. So it was really cool to talk to them and like see how they were so like proud that I was able to have these opportunities. So that was great. And then also to answer like your question about like classmates and that sort of thing, I think that the experience itself is like a really great bonding thing. Like Fredi and I got a lot closer from doing it, so that's great. But then I think also too, it's a really awesome thing to be able to talk about your experiences with sort of your classmates that didn't go or weren't able to go, and to help them with projects or things like that. So if like your topic related to something else, like you're able to bring unique experiences that they wouldn't be able to get from sort of like reviewed articles or things like that, and you can help them out in that sort of way. So yeah, and to say what Mahina said, I just think it's a really awesome thing that the school allows you to do, and how we're like the only undergrad student, or one of like 2 schools in Minnesota that do it for undergrad. So it's really awesome. Yeah.
Yes. Mahina, you touched on how St. Ben's and St. John's offers opportunities to like go to COP and really have an immersive experience within like the climate like change topic. Did you see any instances where it may have been an opportunity that some people may never ever get to have, and how can you encourage climate activism within those individuals? And this is for everyone, not just Mahina.
Can you say the last part of your question?
So, how do you suggest
I think this goes back to something that Jalayna said earlier about the influence of local action and the importance of doing things at a very local scale. And so, quite honestly, when I was at COP, I felt just so overwhelmed by the sheer amount of people and information and activity and everything that was going on, to the point where I sometimes felt like a fraud. I was like, why am I here as a sophomore, or was that? We were juniors, a junior in college, writing research on a paper that probably no one will ever read. And so, to your point, I think local, small scale has a really big impact that we may not think about in the moment, and especially when it's like, oh, we're going to this international conference, I have to contribute, I have to make myself known in this grand scale. You can make yourself known on a really small scale, and if everyone's doing that, the impact will add up. And so even on campus, there are a lot of different ways to get involved, like with Climate Justice Club and other things. And also, just as a general statement, climate activism doesn't always have to look like what you think it would look like traditionally. And because climate change is inherently a social issue, there are so many avenues of being a part of climate activism that might not necessarily fall under that label of climate activism. I hope that answered your question.
Well, I guess just to follow up really quick, we throughout, for those who worked with, I believe she was an alum, but regardless, someone in Minnesota who has started kind of a newspaper called Project Optimist, and I would encourage you to go check it out, as I would encourage anybody to go check it out. Kind of one way where you don't have to travel all the way across the world. Most of us wrote articles for her in that publication. And that was a really cool experience of taking your 15 to 20 page research paper and boiling it down to what are the really important points here and how can we make this a news article. As someone who works for the Record, I feel like I should say that I'm really thankful and happy that we have people who write an environmental column every week or nearly every week. I think regardless of what's in that every week, there's really cool tidbits and things to take out of that, and I'm really appreciative that we have writers who do that, and also Climate Justice Club has helped out with that as well. And so as someone who kind of functions through news sometimes or through those avenues, I think that stuff is really important as well, and certainly easy to contribute to, especially right here on campus and then in the greater Minnesota area.
This is super quick, but kind of going off of what Mahina was saying too, I think, like thinking back to the prior question about like getting back and like talking to your family about it, I think it's kind of, I don't know the word for it, but maybe underappreciated. I don't know how like much it can be sort of activism to just be speaking about it. Like I feel like sometimes it's easy to get in a bubble if you're around people who also like are like, yeah, climate change is a big problem, but it's still sometimes is something that people are either they don't know enough about it or there's a lot of misconceptions. So if you have like the capability or the power to kind of educate people about it, then more people will probably vote towards, you know, more climate forward things. So there's always something to do, even if you feel like it's little, it's still doing something, so.
I have a question. It's kind of two-part, and you guys don't all have to answer it, I guess, but if anybody wants to chime in. First, I'm curious, did you get contact information for any of the people that you met? Is it even possible to, you know, stay in touch with some of your contacts? How realistic is that? And then the second question, like Jalayna said, McAllister's the only other school in Minnesota that does this. Nationally, there's not that many schools where an undergrad is going to be able to go to something like this and have the observer status that the school does, and the relationship, as long as what it's been with COP, is somewhat unique. What's the next step that the school and the participants that are going to go behind you can take? How do we leverage this? What's the next big thing that could be done? What would be optimistic for that?
Let's answer your first question, definitely. I like the way I communicate for like interviewing people, be like walk up to them, be like, hey, I'm doing this project. Sometimes they weren't able to do an interview right then and there, but getting their number and like doing it maybe like a day later or a few hours later that day was something that, you know, had to arrange things like that. But even when, like Landon said, I also wrote for The Optimist and did a little column about my experience and what I did after that and coming back to Minnesota. For one of the people that I interviewed, I reached out back to her and shared that I was going to be doing this and shared the piece that I wrote with her as well. I know she really appreciated that I like shared that like it wasn't just like an interview. I was like doing right then and there, and that was it. It was like I'm actively working on these things, writing and sharing with her permission, sharing what she had told me back here in Minnesota. Like I think we talked about earlier, or I think Tom said that, like, why would someone care about what's happening in Nigeria, Uganda, that's happening to one person, but it's really something impactful that you can bring back and share what has been told to you. The second part, it's like a difficult question, but definitely just being more aware of it as a wider campus community of what climate change and how it's affecting us on campus, especially as like a Catholic Benedictine institution. A lot can be done within that, especially with Catholic theology and just like Pope Francis's call for taking care of the earth in his encyclical Laudato Si. So just like in that aspect, bringing in that like internal support for doing more about climate change at an institutional level, and kind of being a leader in that among private colleges in Minnesota would be really impactful. But you know, it's just like a dream I have. But it's very complicated. Like, we're doing this, but like, what else can we do about the climate crisis here at CSBSGU in the middle of central Minnesota?
Yeah, to answer your first question, WhatsApp is huge. I have a number of people on WhatsApp that like I text, definitely not like weekly, but maybe like once a month, once every 2 months, whatever, like just like a little check-in. And then for your second question, I think COP is an amazing opportunity, and I think we should 100% continue to send students. That being said, it's a little ironic that to get there is, you know, however many tons of carbon emission per student, per plane. And I think Fredi sort of talked about it, like the amount of sway that CSB-SJU has within Minnesota, within our local community, with all the connections that we have. I feel like we could be a really big voice for climate solutions and for climate action. And I think if the school really prioritized that and really took action steps, whether that be going to the state capitol, whether that be however that exhibits itself, I think the school really taking tangible steps towards climate action is something that we can do. Yeah.
Two-part question for anybody who cares to answer. First part, I'm wondering to what extent did participating in class and participating in COP make you more hopeful or less hopeful, seeing it up close, about the climate future? The second part of the question is, to what extent did it seem people in general who participate in COP were optimistic or pessimistic about the climate future? Because I waver between both.
So I went with Tom the second week of COP. So we were the second wave of students in our class that were going to the conference. So going into the week, I had already heard things from the previous group about like what to expect and how to do things. So honestly, I was a little freaked out and not feeling too hopeful. And arriving in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt was overwhelming. And I think I wasn't in a good headspace probably from the 2 straight days of traveling. But just seeing the area that we were in and how it was so resort-like and how a lot of the infrastructure in that city was built specifically for the conference just felt so ironic. And to see all of the people arriving at the airport, I think it was 40,000 people total that had attended the conference and had flown in specifically for the conference. So from the get-go, I was like, we are doing everything wrong. This is the exact opposite of what we should be doing. But by the end of the week, hearing stories from different people and getting to talk to the people that are the ones that are bringing action and making change, there was definitely a vibe switch of there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of optimism here. And so, yeah, I think those conversations and my day-to-day interactions really influenced how I felt by the end of the conference. And coming out of it, I know, like Landon said, the Loss and Damage Fund was a really big kind of win overall, even though there weren't necessarily specific solid action steps that were put into action. That in itself was a really major thing that happened. So overall, hopeful. Yeah.
I think one thing for me that was really humorous about our class, because you go in there's 2 different weeks, so half the class goes one week and half the class goes the other week, but you're in class together for the entire semester. And one thing that I maybe found funnier than other people is that our class was pretty evenly split between political science majors or students and environmental studies majors and students, and I think there was a pretty stark divide in some ways about how we all perceived climate change and went about those things, and even went about preparing for the conference. Neither good nor bad, but certainly different. And I think I'll give a lot of credit to the environmental studies students for being a lot more optimistic than the political science students. And I think it was fun for me to see, even though there were certainly moments of maybe disagreement, which is healthy for a class, but also I think I learned a lot from a lot of those environmental studies students, a lot of whom are on the panel here, about just a willingness to continue to be optimistic throughout these situations. And that was before we even went to COP. I think after COP, I'll agree with what the other panelists have said and just say that it's just super cool to see people who are super determined do what they love to do on a daily basis throughout the week. And I walked away from that really thinking that there's a lot of hope here. I think there's a lot of hope at COP as much as there is stress and nervousness and overwhelming feelings and things like that. I think generally you can't go there and see all those people who are committed to doing what they do and walk away with negative feelings, in my opinion. So.
Similar to Landon, being a political science major, definitely knowing that for major things to change, it takes a very long time. Even being like a history minor in my history courses, seeing civil rights taking hundreds and hundreds of years for a lot of change to happen, and that's still going on. And then taking into account how big the climate crisis is and how it needs to be addressed globally, not just in the United States or Minnesota or even just in central Minnesota. The amount of cooperation worldwide that it's going to take and that needs to happen is just so immense that I'm like, will it happen? That's my kind of seeing patterns throughout other challenges that we're facing already. Yeah, I admire the optimism, and that's what I kind of got out of this as well, being optimistic and knowing that I do have hope that something will happen, some positive change will happen, and that's why I want to do this as part of my future career, and just to learn about, and that's where I got my first steps into the environmental studies department, and just learning more about the political science aspects as well of environmental studies, and trying to learn more of how to kind of connect both my climate activism with my climate policy, two worlds that I kind of live in, and how to work with them together to try and make change happen. But what I will echo about the COP is the people that I interviewed were all in areas that are being like directly affected by climate change, and even so, they're still optimistic that change will happen and that people's lives will get better. And that's what I admired a lot about the people that I interviewed, is that even though they're still going through these things, they don't have complete loss of hope, that they still hold on to some hope that their lives and their children's lives and generations to come will still get to be on the land that they generationally inherited and call home.
I'll try to make this quick, but even like as an environmental studies major, hope is hard. So even if I try to be optimistic, it's a hard thing to do. But for one of the takeaways from COP that I think kind of helps with it is when I would ask that question to my interviewees or people who would be speaking about the conference, they talk about how like hope is kind of like a privileged outlook to kind of have about climate change, and how for a lot of people that are being affected by it, it's not that like, do you have hope about it? It's like, well, it has to get fixed or else like your life is gonna be changed like forever. And so I think that's kind of, it ties into kind of the local action thing of, it's not about whether or not do you have hope about the climate crisis, it's about what are you gonna do about the climate crisis, and that kind of helps with the daunting feeling of everything that's going on.
All right, we are winding down. If I could ask one more question. I'd just like to know who's missing from the CSB SJU community on COP, if you think about the trips. Like which areas should we really tap? Do we need nursing, need some pre-meds? You know, Mahina, are you afraid that there's not going to be art people to follow you, or you know what I mean? Like what kind of people would you love to see ideally that maybe programs ought to reach out to? Doesn't have to be a long answer, but just kind of a shout out in case I happen to be in the audience.
All of them. I think, like Landon said, our class last year was strictly poli-sci or environmental studies, and those are the two most common students that attend these trips. And so I think just getting that diversity in there of interest and knowledge and education would make for a really fruitful classroom experience, and then also travel experience and research experience as a whole.
I would echo that, and something that I've had conversations with my friends in other majors too is just like, how often do you talk about climate change? And for my friends in communications and my friends in business and whatever else, the answer predominantly is like almost never, which I think is not productive, and like you can't wish away the problem. And so I think having students from like a lot of different departments, again, goes back into bringing back that experience, telling your friends, telling your classmates. So again, I think the more varied, the better.
Yeah, same thing. I'd say everyone or all of them. I think that knowledge about COP, even being a class, is something that not a lot of people know about. So maybe having more knowledge about it would make it be more diverse. Now that Tom says that, yeah, business would be a good one. And then I was thinking education majors would probably be a good one to have go more often as well.
Yeah, everyone should attend this. But more specifically, I would love to see more people, theo majors and minors attending this, like kind of getting more of that like faith aspect of what you're kind of like being called to, like as a person of faith, even if you're not like a person of faith as a theology major or minor, kind of having that perspective of how that all plays a role into kind of like how you should like behave in the world in a way, or like what you should keep in mind like as a person of faith in regards to the climate crisis, and how it should be really forefront in what you're trying to like do with your life.
I think I might have, sorry. I think I might have a little bit of a bias in this, but Economics, finance, GBUS is really important in the fight against climate change as well, and it's a really underrepresented part of the COP class. I've done a lot of my research on climate finance, technology transfers, all of these things. They're a huge part of the backbone of making people's lives better, and really like building resilience is developed nations sending money, and how does that work? And I think that there are a lot of really fantastic and driven finance and economics majors at CSPSJU that don't know about the class and aren't getting involved with that. So.
Yeah, I mean, not many majors left, but I think agreeing with what everybody said, I think I'll just add, there's something for everybody at COP. I saw like nutrition majors or minors or whatever could benefit from the hunger stuff that happened there. Some of my friends who are taking like financial jobs at United Health Group could probably benefit from this experience and allow them to see the world in a different way. So I don't have anything else. Everybody's covered it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming, and I want to kind of remind you of kind of the ghosts of well, I'm pretty positive it was this room. Wangari Maathai, help me out here if John or Kelly or Wangari Maathai, the Kenyan Nobel Peace Prize winner, I'm pretty sure gave the address in this room, which was powerful as a Kenyan. I think one of the first women in Kenya to get a PhD, at least in the biological sciences. But she started out at a Benedictine college in Kansas, all right, I believe. And then she went on and got a degree in Pittsburgh and then ultimately in Nairobi. And then I remember Jody Williams, who came to St. Ben's, but what I remember about that talk, it was a good talk. She got the Nobel Prize for the campaign to end landmines. And she talked about how the international campaign to ban landmines started with her getting a fax machine to talk to one other German guy, or to send faxes back and forth. And so they said, well, that's international, so we can call our group the International Campaign to Ban Landmines. Jody Williams, who had previously been working at the Gap, and some guy in Germany who had a similar kind of belief that that would be a good thing to do. So I thank you very, very much for coming today, and I would like to ask you as well to come back tonight at 7 p.m. over in the Science Center Auditorium, the Pellegrin Auditorium of Pengal, I guess you call it now, right? And I put it over there because that was a little cue to like those science types that might not have been present on COP, like, oh, it's in the Science Center Auditorium, maybe I should go. Okay, so hopefully you'll see some of your peers that are training in the biology and chemistry and physics and that there, because we need all hands on deck. I invite any of you who'd like to stay for a few minutes to come up and talk to the panelists. And if possible, I'd like to see my people who are here from Peace Studies 368 real quick, just for a minute. Okay, so thank you all very, very much. And thank you, panelists.